Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our third session in our Early Childhood Education and Care Conversation series. That's a mouthful for a Monday morning too. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands on which we're all joining from today. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. My name is Bree and I'm joining today from the lands of the Murrumbidgee people on Yuin Nation. I do encourage you to share which lands you're joining from in the chat. Just a couple of quick notes before we begin. We are hoping that this is going to run for approximately 30 minutes. A few of the other sessions have gone a little bit over, but I mean, there's just such great things to talk about and we've all got a lot to say, so we'll try and keep it to that. This session is being recorded and all registered participants will receive a link to the recording afterwards. If you need any technical support, please just use the chat function. For any questions about the content, please use the Q&A box. We will try and answer these questions if time permits. Otherwise, we'll ensure the questions are addressed and the answers are provided with the video recording afterwards. As I mentioned, this is being recorded for future viewing, so please be mindful of this when you're asking questions and engaging in the chat. And if you could please refrain from taking screenshots or making your own recordings without permission. As I said, this is our third in our 4-part conversation series on navigating early childhood education and care for children with disability. This series is brought to you by Belongside Families. That might be a new name to some of you because we were formerly known as Kindred, in partnership with the Early Childhood Intervention Best Practice Network. Today we're going to be talking on building strong partnerships with your early childhood and early education care provider. Sorry, there's so many mouthfuls this morning. And we are very fortunate to be joined by two wonderful speakers who are going to share their expertise and experiences. So pleased to say we've got Deborah, sorry, a peer-to-peer mentor, facilitator and family worker at Noah's Inclusion Services with 20 years of experience and also the lived experience as a parent of a child with Down syndrome. And we're also joined by Rachel, so parent to two non-speaking autistic boys, Manaya and Keanu, who will share her journey in building collaborative relationships with providers. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's exciting. But before we get started, I just always want to acknowledge that everyone's journey is unique, and we encourage you to take what resonates with your situation and discuss it with your child support network. This might be their educators, their therapists, and the medical professionals that support you. The best outcomes often come from a collaborative approach where families work together with their child's team to adapt those strategies to suit their specific circumstances. So let's get into it. And I'm going to go to you first, Deb. Obviously, with your unique perspective as both a professional and a parent, could you paint a picture of what a truly effective partnership between families and early childcare providers looks like?
Yes, for sure. So I guess, building those strong relationships, partnerships with those, everybody on your child's team and working together. And you said it in a nutshell, actually, Brie, is working collaboratively. So that involves listening to each other, communicating with each other and sharing information. So it's really about that good communication. And so sometimes, there can be lots of people working with your child all at the same time. And this can be quite stressful, especially when important information and skills aren't being shared between the team and your family. So it's best when a team is formed around your child that work together. So collaboratively. And so we talk about ECEC and we talk about ECI. And so I guess just to talk about who might be on your child's team is, somebody like a key worker, speech pathologist, it might be an OT, it might be a physio, it might be behaviour support. But obviously, and then early childhood educators and teachers, which is obviously what we're talking about here, but other professionals such as dietitians and psychologists, your pediatrician, and sometimes I don't really like the word professional, I just use that word, but because you're the professional on your child. I often talk about how most of you will have a master's degree, on your child. So ultimately, your child is central to all the decision making, but you are definitely an important part of that decision making process. So, and there's lots of different ways that you can be building those relationships. So we might talk about that a little bit later. But my main message would be is to get involved and look at all the different opportunities of making good connections.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, Rachel, thinking about your journey with Manaya and Keanu, how do you approach building those initial relationships with those providers?
Yeah, I think the motherly side of me wanted to go in guns blazing with both boys, particularly because they're both non-speaking and I feel that I am their voice. However, I reminded myself that all strong relationships or partnerships really take time. It wasn't just about time for the educators to get to know my children. It was also actually time for us to understand the centre or the daycare or the preschool, how it works, their values, their beliefs. So, you know, in those initial days or weeks, we really just took time to get to know each other. As a family, for my children as well. I think a big thing from the get-go was respect. You know, we obviously want our children to be respected, but we also wanted to give respect to the educators. They're qualified, they're experienced. So we went in with a lot of patience, a lot of trust, and like Deb said, communication was key, but obviously not full steam ahead at the beginning. It was a slow burn. It was a build, like all great relationships are, and that worked really well for both boys.
Yeah, amazing. And what have you found to be the most effective ways to communicate with your child's needs to the staff?
Yeah, I think two things. Those daily occurrences. It's really hard at drop off and pick up to have in-depth conversations. I'm also very mindful of having conversations like that around my child or their peers. I don't really want to be talking about if he's having a challenge or a hard time in front of him and his friends. I don't think that's respectful. So at drop off, it was definitely a quick drop off, a quick hi, didn't sleep, did sleep, hasn't eaten, has eaten. And then we would kind of fall back on the preferred method of communication from the centre. So if they preferred the app, we'd use the app. Emails, phone call, I'd call. Every inclusion support worker or daycare manager is different. So I kind of just went down the path of what they preferred, and that seemed to work really well. But yeah, it was really interesting in the beginning trying to navigate that and understand what worked best for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Yeah, different people, different approaches, even within same centres. So, Deb, I know you speak to families all the time. What are your tips for when they need to approach their early childcare settings?
So I guess in terms of I absolutely echo what Rachel has said. It does take a little bit of time, but if you're talking about time, if time permits, I think one of the things is if you're able to sort of get involved and be seen and be seen to be useful, that means that if you've got any little challenges, that they're actually sort of often nipped in the bud before they blow up. And that then you can work out if there's a challenge or something that needs to be ironed out, that you're working collaboratively when you've got that good relationship, so that you're not just turning up when there's a problem, you're actually there for all the good bits. And because ultimately what you want is and I agree with Rachel, is don't be afraid to ask about the best way to communicate, because you want that conversation to be fluent. So it's a continuing conversation, and that fluidity is what you really want, that fluency, sorry. So one of the ways, you can get involved is that, and it doesn't mean, oh gosh, I'm working, I haven't got time, but there are ways you can do P&C where that might be in the evening, or you might help with an excursion, or you might help with class reading, or it might be that you share your talents. You might go in and say, if you're artistic, you might do some art, sharing about your culture, donating unwanted toys, as you know, if they're appropriate, helping with working bees, and if you're not able to, maybe you might be able to share your grandparents' talents. You know, for instance, you know, we had a grandparent that recently made a mud kitchen for our early childhood education centre. So there might be fundraising, there might be Mother's Day stalls, the trivia nights, working bees. There's lots of different ways that you can be involved. And but yeah, looking at the different ways to communicate it can be as simple as an exercise book. You can get those cheap exercise books, and if it doesn't come back, then just start using another one. I think they're like 60 cents at the beginning of the school year, aren't they? But there are lots of different apps, and it's talking to the centre and asking, you know, I know I don't know all the different apps, but there's Story Park, and you might be able to know a few more, Rachel.
I think we've been through a few as well. I know
Yeah,
we use Class Dojo, and I can't remember the one we used in our childcare. That was
yeah,
I
yeah.
think as
So
well, it's hard in the beginning, and you would know too, Deb. It's hard in the beginning to have these conversations too. So I want to be mindful of people at the beginning of the journey. If you don't want to have that verbal conversation, then like Deborah said, having an exercise book or writing an email, something like that, might be an easier way to, you know, to start that relationship and approach it in a way that's not so confronting.
yeah. And sometimes, you know, with a communication book, I know we used that, but that was quite a while ago. But it meant that they said, we haven't got time to write back in. I said, well, if you can just give me maybe 3 ticks, and then I know he's had a good day. And I guess that's where using that, and it can be verbal in person, but as Rachel, you know, rightly said, you know, obviously you've got to be respectful of your child, and you don't want to be discussing certain things at the school gate. But so ask them, you know, can I email? Can I text? Can we, you know, do it on a post-it note? Can we, you know, some people have written it on a serviette. So I think right from the get-go, it's really good to check in and just say, listen, you know, I want to ask who is the best person to chat to, what's the best time to chat with that person, and if, you know, to request those regular check-ins and be actually proactive about those regular catch-ups, and ask them what's the best way to do that, because you want to be able to celebrate the successes, and you want to be able to connect, and you want to be able to talk about the positives and not just the challenges, and that's sort of building relationships. So it can be over the phone, it can be Zoom, it can be in person, those regular checkups, and then just ironing out any niggles, because we have to remember, that you have known your child for a long time. We can't expect our educators, yes, they may have a degree in education, but they don't have a degree on your child. So it is sharing that information and building those fluid conversations, and also asking for a team meeting, and doing this at the start is quite good, so that they know what your expectation is. And it's completely reasonable. It's not as though you're going to be the only parent asking for this, but at least once a semester, I would say, is minimum. And that can try and keep everybody on the same page. You can discuss goals, you can look at progress, you can share valuable information and resources that help support your child, and you can, obviously, you as the primary carer is definitely the first person there, but another set of ears is always great. That can be a family member, it can be a friend, even if it's just to take notes. When people are talking in meetings about your child, it can be quite an emotional experience. So sometimes they might say something and that triggers something. How dare they say that? That's not true. That doesn't happen. Why are they talking about that? Then they go on, and it turns out that only happened once, but you didn't hear that next part of the conversation. So it's good to have another set of ears. Then you can get the team around your child. So that's your, your speech, your OT, your physio, can be the dietitian, your key worker, whoever is around that. And then with those team meetings, actually spending a bit of time preparing and doing those dot points. and then finding out who's going to be at that meeting and give them a copy of your dot points so you can keep the meeting on track, because you're and only to about 6. Don't try and do a whole scribe. You can write lots of notes, but just key points that you would like to discuss, because what can happen is you can come out of those meetings and they discuss 4, 5, 6, and 1, 2, 3 was actually the most important. And I've been into a meeting myself where I've handed over the dot point, thought I was well prepared, and all I wanted to do was cry the entire meeting. But because my dot points were there, I was still in control of the meeting, and it still went the way I wanted it to go, even though I felt like I couldn't actually speak. And in those meetings, I always say, start with the positives, and always talk about all the wonderful things that they're doing, because people do more if they feel appreciated. So yeah, we and building that relationship. I don't know whether I can now go on to Bree about creating those first impressions.
Yeah, sure.
Yep. So yeah, for us, the families that I work with, I always encourage them to do sort of like an intro page or an intro folder, and that's not talking about any, this is all positive stuff. We want to list all the wonderful qualities with less focus on your child's diagnosis. So we want it to be strengths-based. We want to talk about all the things they can do. We want to build on the child's strengths and interests and their ability to help them grow and develop using those interests and strengths. So as an early childhood provider, we are aiming to listen and communicate with families and find ways to listen to families and information about their child. And an All About Me page is a really great way to introduce the child, and find out who's in their circle, map out connections and supports, and to involve families in those decision-making processes, because ultimately all of that is going to help your child learn, develop and thrive in that education setting.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
Sorry, I went on a little bit there.
That's okay. It's all useful information. Rachel, I want to come back to you now, because you've actually mentioned to us that your boys have had very different experiences despite sharing the same diagnosis. They've attended different centres. So could you share an example of how you've navigated partnerships with both of those different centres?
Yeah, absolutely. My oldest son, Mania, so it's funny when Deb was saying you're quite emotional during those meetings. I remember the early days with Mania, and I really fell back on my team. We have a collaborative approach with both boys in terms of their therapy. So they have, a few different providers. And in those early days when it was quite difficult for me to have those conversations about my baby, it was really great to utilise the team. So that just took me back, Deb, when you were talking about that. But yes, completely different experiences. So my 2 boys, exact same diagnosis, chalk and cheese, completely opposite. So that meant different places for them where they could thrive. So for Mania, his long daycare centre was quite relaxed, quite a new centre. So the staff there were quite young. That was great for us because they were very open to us bringing our providers in. There was no pushback. They were very happy to do whatever they could do to support Mania, which was amazing for us. But it also meant that they weren't as experienced as some educators. Even though their intentions were amazing, they just didn't have the experience that others would have. That was okay though. We used our team, like I said. We tried to upskill the educators. They loved it because it not only helped Mania, it helped the children that were there currently. It helped children for years to come. So that was really interesting because it was kind of like we grew together. We're all young. We're all in this from the get-go. And I loved that they were so open and forthcoming about providing whatever Mania needed and being really open to external providers coming into the centre. Then my younger son, Keanu, a very different experience. So we actually did start him at that centre. He didn't like the relaxed approach. He didn't like, just kind of doing what he wanted when he wanted to, with therapists coming in and out and helping him. He wasn't a fan of that. So we did actually change centres very quickly. Then the centre that we went to was lovely, amazing, but they were very opinionated and had, different values to us. So that was interesting, going from a centre that we all seem to just kind of be feeling our way through it and understanding and making mistakes and making changes to, we only do things this way at this centre, was quite shocking. However, I always knew that our intentions were the same, which was to support Keanu in the best way possible. So we had a bit of a different approach with this one. We respected their values, their opinions, but at that point, that was when I brought the team in. This was probably a few weeks in, brought the team in, had a really great team powwow. Started off with, everyone here has the right intention. We all want what's best for Keanu. Let's talk it out. There were some issues that were brought up, and it's really... It's hard to navigate these conversations when there's different personalities in the room. But like Deb said, if you stick to your points and you know why you're there and what you need to discuss, either yourself or your partner or a family member is that person that can keep it on track, depending on your personality and, how best you communicate. So, it was just interesting that we had such different experiences, but I remained true to our values. Respect was a big thing for us. We respected that they had, a lot of experience. The manager and owner had children themselves. We respected that, but we also wanted to be able to communicate what works for our child and how that can be different to other children. And eventually we did get to that point, thanks to the support of our team and thanks to them being open as well to communicate. And we continued those meetings until he finished daycare, and it was great.
That's amazing. And it is so nice that, you've got people that are open to that collaboration and having those external supports come in. Deb, from your experience in mentoring families, what are some of the common challenges that parents face when they're advocating for their children, and what can they do to help overcome that?
Yeah, and listen, and it can be really frustrating when you feel that the early childhood education provider isn't really listening. And I guess ultimately, as Rachel has said, we do have to remember everybody is on the same page. Everybody does want the same thing, and that's for your child to learn, develop and thrive in that education environment. What can be really helpful is to have sort of an overall vision. You can call it a vision. We call it what is important for our child, and refer back to that. And that is quite a sort of a good guide. Now, if you're not sure what I'm talking about, it's what you want for your child, and it's pretty much the same as any child, but it can actually be handy to write that down and give that to the educators to show actually what we want is the same as everyone else, because I think they think, we've got a child here, we have to do things differently, and ultimately a lot of it is the same. So we want our child to be included just the same as any other child in that classroom. So writing things down is, yes, we want education, but we want to achieve the best outcomes possible. We want our child to belong. We want them to be safe. We want them to feel secure. We want them to be happy. We want them to grow up with their peers in their own neighbourhood. We want them to make friends, being actively involved with other children in the class, being safe in the playground, encouraged to develop their abilities, being treated with and spoken about with respect, and being seen as a child, not a problem, and being welcomed as a really valuable member of that education space. And then having their strengths and interests recognised and used as much as possible, and being an active, not only welcomed, but continuing to be an active and valued member of that class, which is actually the same as any parent wants for their child, but actually writing it down and giving it to the educators, you can almost see a penny drop often when they go, oh, okay, yeah, well, that's actually obvious. Yeah, because sometimes, yeah, we are stating the bleeding obvious.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
we want them to be included the same way as any other child. And obviously, yes, there are some different ways that they might be adapting resources and supports, but ultimately that's our common goal. So as I said before, you've got a degree, probably a master's degree, but the educators, we need to educate the educators as parents. And we do need to highlight those strengths and interests and how those can be utilised. And communication is key. So we've already talked about, always starting with the positives and that people will always do more if they feel appreciated. And you want to avoid the blame game. So if you're going in to ask for a regular check-in in one of those meetings, we want to remember that we want to maintain those positive relationships. So we might be going to them to talk about, we would like to share with you some of the strategies that work at home that might work in this setting. We want to share information, we want to share resources, we might call in our allied health team, but we want to make sure that what we're doing is we're not getting aggressive, we're not getting angry, we're not dishonoring others, we're not sort of overly expressive. I don't know whether crying, does that sound? No, I think we're allowed to cry. There are babies. So what I talk to a lot of families is, and I've got a little table which we could probably, you could probably share down the chat. Yeah, is there's a little table which basically looks at, we don't want to be passive in our behaviours we don't want to just go, oh yeah, okay. We don't want to be aggressive. We want to be assertive. So we want everyone to be respecting rights of self and of others, but we want to make sure that our children's needs are met, and we want to feel confident that they are meeting those needs, and we want to, make them aware that we would like to be involved in some of those decision-making processes. So I think that's where it's really good to have those meetings and take another set of ears, so they can hear the bits that you've missed. But also, if you're in a team meeting and there's 3 educators and you, potentially, it's always good to find out who's going to be at those meetings. It's sort of, I used to feel I was going to the principal's office. So I sort of felt maybe a little bit defensive, but it also does mean by having another set of ears, there can be somebody that they might just give you a little tap or a little pat on the back or just a little look or a smile, or just say, they might step in and say, it's okay to take a bit of a breath. And then I think what they might mean is such and such. And I've actually done it where I've heard of a family that said, oh, Deborah says I need to take a child, somebody else, another set of ears. I haven't got another set of ears. No one can come now. And they actually had somebody come in to fix their washing machine. And he said, are you all right? Love, you seem a bit agitated because, I've got this meeting and I know I'm going to be really emotional and I know I'm not allowed to be. And I'm feeling really angry about what's happening. And he actually said, do you want me to come along? And he went along to the meeting. So it doesn't need to be, in fact, sometimes it's better if it's not a family member because they can be emotional as well.
Yeah.
But having that set of ears, it can kind of be almost anybody, is really, really valuable.
Definitely impartial, the washing machine repairman.
Yeah. Good on him. And I think, and it was good because he came out learning more about it, so that we're here to educate the world, aren't we?
I'm mindful of the time, so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. But Rachel, I was just going to go to you and sort of say, what does good communication actually look like for your family?
Yeah, absolutely. Communication is the most important thing to us, given that the boys don't speak. So daily check-ins, those quarterly meetings, and during those quarterly meetings, if you have them quarterly, however often you have them, it can be overwhelming with so many cooks in the kitchen. But it's also really beneficial, you know, if you have these meetings. I've never, ever left one of those meetings and thought that was a waste of time. Everyone's learning something. So good communication to us is definitely daily check-ins, emails for the wins and the challenges, and those quarterly meetings. And I think, you know, also being respectful of what the educators are communicating to us as families. They put a lot of time and effort into, you know, if you've got the apps, which is pretty common now, they put a lot of effort into what they explain that they're doing during the day with not just our children, but all of the children. I try and be quite receptive to all of that, communicate back, show them our appreciation. I'm a firm believer of you get more bees with honey. So, you know, just liking a post that they've put up about the child's day, saying great work, guys. We're big advocates on making little gifts at Christmas time. You know, it doesn't have to cost a fortune, but just showing that appreciation and fostering that relationship every day pays dividends.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm kind of coming to my last couple of questions here because I know that there are people watching that might be like, it's 11:30. But what advice would you give to parents who are just starting their early childcare journey and feeling nervous about building these relationships? Happy to hear from both of you.
I think for me, it's trust your intuition. If you feel like it's not the best place for your child, then it's not. Obviously, give it a go, have discussions, but if ultimately you feel that it isn't the best place, then trust that you do know your child best. And also just trust that everyone has the right intention with your child. Most people are choosing that form of career for a reason, and it's because they love to develop and care for children, all children, not just typical neurotypical children as well. And at the end of the day, this whole process, as hard as it can be, is, you know, you have challenging phone calls, emails, or you get the wins. All of it is making all of us better as people, better parents, better educators. So just try and take a step back, breathe, and think about the long goal, the end goal, not just what's happening day to day.
Yeah, I love that you spoke about intention because it's something that when someone asks me something, I always try and think about what is the intention behind the question. It's usually generally a good intention. It just might not align with like our values or our vision. So it's like, thank you, appreciate that. However, Deb, what advice would you give to parents who are just starting out on the journey?
I think certainly don't be apologetic about your child, because I think sometimes families sort of are worried, oh, you know, it's going to mean more work. But we have to remember our kids are going to bring so much more to that education setting than the other way around, because they will bring so many, well, they'll bring their parents that advocate and are getting involved, but also it gives the educators another opportunity to experience your wonderful child. And we do need to remember that about 25% of school students receive adjustments due to disability. So it's and research shows us that other children benefit from having children with disability in their education settings. The research evidence shows us that it's equal or greater cognitive and language skills, because kids have to negotiate how to maybe communicate with a child in different ways. It shows that there are fewer challenging behaviours and definitely more advanced social skills for those other children in the class. And I often talk about there's a whole licorice all sorts of kids in the class. It's not as though your child is going to be the only one. And yeah, as Rachel said, yeah, definitely go with your gut. You know, does your child feel comfortable? Do you feel comfortable? If you don't, then, you know, have a look at all your options, explore options. You might be set on one particular setting, but it's good to actually explore all your options so that if things do go belly up, you know what your other options are, rather than racing around going, is that going to work? Is that going to work? When you're in a stress state, it's actually good to explore what your options are when you're calm and just considering your options. And you might be surprised that one setting, you know, and as Rachel has said, that she chose different settings for her boys, because yeah, our kids are all individuals and different and have different needs. And, you know, just even going along with a friend to a centre at drop off and pick up, gives you a sense of what that centre might look like for your child. So asking around people, where does your child go? Asking if you can go and have a visit. And then just asking what that transition process might look like so that you're feeling comfortable about your child starting at that new centre. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. All right, last question. If there was one key message you want parents to take away about building strong partnerships, what would it be?
I think just the amount of effort you put in, you get back tenfold. It doesn't have to be a lot of work for you. You're already busy enough. You've already got a lot on your plate. It can be as simple as, just a nice greeting in the morning, but whatever, effort or intentions you put into the centre and the educators, you're going to get back tenfold. And they're the people that are spending 20, 30, 40 hours a week with your child. You want them to feel appreciated because we know how hard it is. It's hard for them too.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. So I guess communication and having that fluent conversation so that you can iron out any little challenges, but also celebrate all the wonderful wins that are ahead.
Amazing. Oh, sorry, everyone, we ran over. I knew we would. We always do. But thank you, Deborah and Rachel, for sharing those insights and experiences with us today. Very practical advice. I love the personal stories, and it's really shown us the true impact that strong partnerships with early childcare providers can have on a child's experience and development. Thank you to everyone that's watched live today, and appreciate everyone that's going to watch the replay. As I mentioned earlier, this is our third session in a 4-part series. Our final session will focus on what to do if it's not working. And that's going to be held on the 31st of March. I'm just going to pop the link into the chat for anyone that hasn't registered for that session. If you have registered, you will receive a reminder email with the connection details closer to the date. These discussions have been great. I definitely think today has highlighted how building strong partnerships with your early childcare providers can create a foundation of support that helps children thrive. And like you've both said, I think remember that you are an essential member of your child's team. What did you say? Have a master's degree, Deborah? I'm going to use one now. I always say I'm the team captain, but I'm going to say I've got a master's degree in myself. But obviously, you bring that unique knowledge and insights that complement the expertise of educators and therapists. Thank you, everyone, for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you all at our final session, where we're going to continue exploring ways to support your child's early education journey.
Thank you, everyone, and enjoy this rite of passage.
Yes, absolutely. Happy Monday. Have a great week, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, Deb. Thanks, Ray.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.